All right, we're doing this. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. It's good to have you. So in today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit about a few of the general reloading sequence steps. I plan to do multiple videos on this. That way it's a lot easier to digest and watch the videos instead of me making like a 3-hour long video for something that could take 30 minutes to explain. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit about different depriming methods. Might talk a little bit about annealing, and we're going to touch a little bit on case cleaning. So I ended up going to the range today with one of my old Army buddies, and now I got just all kinds of brass that's ready to be reloaded, or at least have the process started. So in this series, we're only going to be reloading this one cartridge or this other cartridge. You'll see all kinds of weird stuff or different cases, but it'll make sense later on in the series, or hell, maybe even later on in this video. So we're going to start with depriming. And although I don't own one, my friend has a 6.5 Creedmoor rifle. It is pretty sweet. It's an RPR for what it's worth. So we're going to start with getting our shell holder. This one happens to be a Lee number 2. And we're just going to go ahead and deprime this. Now, because I don't own a 6.5 Creedmoor resizing die, we're going to be using a universal decapping die. And this particular one happens to be made by a company called FW Arms. I ended up losing my primer catcher tray for this press. So I got to grab some random container to catch my primers so I don't have them all over my damn floor. So in this particular die, we're going to bring the ram all the way up, turn the die till the primer pops out. There it is. Now, the manufacturer says to back it out one turn, but in my experience using this die, that has been kind of silly. So instead of backing it out one turn, I'm going to turn it down half a turn. And that's about it. There we go. Usually with reloading, you want to document pretty much everything you're doing, or at least all the important things that you're doing, so you don't end up with 500 bags of the same caliber or boxes of the same caliber. You have no idea what the hell you did to it. Kind of crappy, but it is what it is. We ended up shooting 60 pieces. I'm probably going to go ahead and deprime all of these and edit out the boring stuff. It is what it is. I'm sure you folks don't want to see me decapping 60 pieces of 6.5 Creedmoor, especially considering that I currently don't have anything that shoots 6.5 Creedmoor, so don't expect to see it anytime soon. All right, now that we're done depriming our 6.5 Creedmoor brass, we're going to move on to 5.56 brass. 5.56 223. Now, this brass, because we're changing from 6.5 Creedmoor, we're going to remove our lead number 2 shell holder. All right, now that we're done depriming the 6.5 Creedmoor brass, we're going to move over to 5.56 223 brass. Now, the shell holder that I'm holding here happens to be a Redding, which, no, it did not come black. I somehow did this. I'll tell you folks about that at a later date. But anyway, one thing you can do with your shell holder is spinning around in your RAM. Put a little bit of Teflon on it, 1 or 2 wraps, and you should be good to go. As far as minimizing rotation. Now, 556, 223, and I would imagine some 308 brass, or specifically 762 by 51 brass. Because it's military brass, it has a tendency to have crimped primer pockets, or so you may need to remove that. I don't know about 308, but it is what it is. So, let me back out. So with 556 and 223 brass, because of those crimped primer pockets, it'll be very firm sometimes. Oh, that's great. All right, that one's deprimed, but it's a bit excessive. I'll show you folks what a crimp looks like. This brass, based on the head stamp, came from some Federal 223 ammo. I don't know how well this crap is going to focus. Screw it. I'll take a picture of it. Anyway, let's try this setup one more time. Or let me try to get it right. Goodness gracious. Yep. Almost. Got it there that time. All right, I'm going to screw the die a half turn down. Bring our case up to get some tension on it. And then lock it down. This setting isn't really critical. It's not like sizing, which we'll talk about in a later video. Now, since I know there's another caliber that I want to deprime pretty much immediately after this, now would be a good time for me to get some lube on those cases. But we're going to be using some Redding Imperial sizing die wax, and that stuff, let's just say it's the gold standard when it comes to lubing cases. All this ammo, all this brass so far came from factory ammo. The 6.5 Creedmoor and this 223 and 5.56 brass. The hell? That's out. But the 300 blackout brass that we're going to be depriming next was all hand loads using new Starline brass. I'm a fan of Starline brass. Now, once we get done depriming these 5.56 and 223 cases, we're going to keep them separated. What the hell? We're going to keep them separated because there's additional case prep that needs to be done to this ammo. Oh, let's just not go through the RAM, their primer and anvil. And also, when you're depriming, I like to look and actually make sure that the primer is removed before I put it with other deprimed cases. Like I was saying about documenting, one thing you can one thing you don't have to document is if you've deprimed your cases, because it should be obvious. If you can't tell whether or not a primer is in there, you might need to change. Anyway, so here's our 300 blackout brass, which today was great because finally have it all fire formed. So we're going to get this crap out. Actually, this is a really good die. So before we get to depriming the 300 blackout brass, because we're going to be using a sizing die that is not made by Redding, we're going to get rid of the Redding shell holder and swap that one for a Hornady shell holder. I cleaned these dies a few hours ago, which probably means nothing to you guys unless you are actively in the room with me right now, which is only one person in this room with me. But it should be good. Now, the Hornady shell holder for 5.56, 223, 300 blackout, etc. is a number 16. Whenever possible, you do want to match the shell holder manufacturer with your sizing die manufacturer. I don't think it's going to cause catastrophic failure, but I'm also not willing to test that. So, there's a few different types of case lubes out there. But like I said earlier, if I didn't edit it out, the best one, one of the more popular ones is Redding Imperial Sizing Die Wax. Actually, I shouldn't show you this jacked up looking can. Yeah, this stuff. I am a fan. Aside from the fact that you pretty much have to apply all of it by hand. Now, normally when I'm resizing, I don't use the expanders. The expander ball, expander assembly, whatever you want to call it. A few things you want to do as far as lubing any bottleneck cartridge. You only need a little bit. Generally, you want to get the body, not so much the neck. It'll work its way up there. Don't worry. Now, let's assume that this is a new die or it was not cleaned today. For the first round, the first case, you're going to want to take some of the lube, whatever it is, and get it inside the case mouth to lubricate the expander. And that's going to help prevent you from getting stuck cases. So, yeah. The good thing about using a lube like the Imperial Sizing Die Wax is that you don't have to lube every case. Every third case, every other case if you wanted to be particularly careful. I'm sure there's something I'm going to forget here, but I wanted to include this, even though, again, it is not my normal method for decapping, depriming, what have you. If I were only sizing or decapping like 10 pieces, that's one thing, but this is generally in an attempt to save time. I gravitate more toward the universal dies. So with this one, I'm going to leave the Hornady shell holder in and go right back to my FW Arms die. The good thing about using a universal die to deprime is that you can lube your cases and run them through the universal die and then run them through a sizing die, which may sound redundant, but it's up to you on how you want to deprime. Turn until feel tension, wait for that pop. There it goes. They say back out, I say screw in. Get this baby nice and tight. There's really nothing special about decapping the 300 blackout here. I just really like this die. Also, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to deprime live primers, and by that I mean primers where the firing pin did not strike the primer at all, if you add water to the case mouth, the water will neutralize the priming compound, and it also does the same with gunpowder. Now, I'm not saying it's going to automatically eliminate any chance with the smallest possible measurable amount of water, but what I am saying is if you're paranoid about that kind of thing, fill the case, I guess, halfway up, or hell, all the way up, or if it makes you sleep, if it helps you sleep better at night, just submerge the whole case in water. Let it stay there a day or two, what have you, and you should be fine. All right, guys, so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of annealing. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. It's probably going to look choppy and crappy, but here goes. So for annealing, I'm just using propane. Now, I happen to, since I'm using this toolbox, I'm just using one of these magnetic cup holders to kind of get the propane tank where I want it. So basically, I just want to get the torch to about where the brass is going to be in the middle. I'm using one of these drill adapters. This one happens to be a 3/8 drive, and I'm using a 3/8 to 1/4 inch drive adapter for that. And the socket that I'm using for the 6.5 Creedmoor brass is, what do we got here? 12 millimeter. Now, this adapter, this, I guess, step down adapter, whatever you want to call it, isn't necessary, but it just so happens that I don't have a 3/8 drive 12 millimeter socket, or whatever the imperial equivalent is to that. Now, this is about where I want to start. By the way, what I'm using to kind of get set up is some brass that is not what I'm going to be using permanently. This brass, interestingly enough, the brass that was shot out of my buddy's gun was from Hornady ammo, and so is this brass. But to make sure I don't get them confused, I just drilled holes in them. See? Yeah, there we go. So again, this is basically going to be for the setup of this annealing, well, setup that I have here. So a few things before I get started. I want to get a small cookie sheet. I got this from the dollar store for $2, maybe $3. I kind of wish I would have got 2, but it is what it is. Now I'm going to set this up here on my bench, or rather my box, so that when the brass gets to where I want it, I can just kind of, no, that's not going to work. Do something like that, pretty much kind of flick it out. The brass that we care about If it were, let's say these were not Hornady, I wouldn't have to drill holes in them. I would just be worried about the head stamp, or I would just be looking for the head stamp to differentiate them. So, being that these are Hornady and these are Hornady, that's, again, that's why we have the holes drilled into them for distinction. I'm not sure how well this is going to come across on camera, but we'll see. All right, here we go. That's no good. Basically, you want to try and get a consistent speed, and I'm glad that this happened with some of the brass we're using for setup here. All right, we got a little bit of a glow. What I'm afraid might happen here is the brass, once it gets heated, won't want to come out of this this annealing mandrel, which I did a video on those before, if you're interested. But we'll try. And again, this is why we're using brass to kind of set up our setup. Here we go. You want a nice, consistent speed. Whether that speed is fast or slow, it's up to you. Oh, yeah. I'm getting a little bit of glow in there. Ain't bad. It ain't bad. Now, another thing that gives me cause for concern here is this brass that we're using, the setup brass, was fired from a different gun. So the chamber could be just different enough to the point where it might slide out of the mandrel easier, the brass of unknown origin, versus the brass that we fired from a known gun, where we know who owns the gun, who shot it. But let's give it a try. That ain't good. Yeah, let's not do that. All right. Glad it didn't get hot before we figured that out. I think that the movement of the case within the socket might prove to be problematic in a little bit. No, we'll see. All right, we're getting some glowing on the neck, just about to the neck and shoulder junction. That's good enough for me. Which I guess I should show you folks some before and after pictures. I'll save one before I do the last one, the last piece, so you guys can see what it looks like. It would be really nice if this drill had one of those the speed locks or trigger locks, whatever. I'm not sure what it's called, but I had a drill that had that once. It would have been really good for this application right here. I don't think you folks are going to want to see this entire process, but I'm going to keep on doing this with the camera running, and I'll edit it out later.